Tech CEOs keep telling me that AI job loss concerns might be overblown, but one economist just told me she thinks the results could be earth shattering. So, what do we do about it? That's this week on Platformer. This podcast is brought to you by Atlassian Rovo, the AI that takes your team from AI novice to AI native. Welcome to Platformer. I'm Casey Newton. This week on the show, Brookings senior fellow Molly Kinder joins us to talk about what she calls the messy middle, the period in between the start of AI job disruption and whatever might be waiting for us on the other side of it. Molly is somebody who believes that the possibility of AI job loss is very real, unlike some of our previous guests who tried to sort of present us with the idea that jobs are going to change a lot but not go away. Molly really takes seriously the idea that they might, and she has noticed that we seem to have basically no plan for what to do if that happens. So that is a great conversation. I'm excited to share it with you. First, though, as always, we begin by checking in on the state of AI and jobs. And that means it's time to bring in Platformer Fellow and Gen Z AI correspondent, Ella Markianos. Ella, how are you this week?
I'm doing great. In my personal life, I'm feeling kind of good about AI automation because I just had Claude design some platformer laptop stickers for me that we're going to be handing out at our live event. And I love a sticker, so I think all of this job loss is probably worth it.
Sure. I mean, yeah, if the sticker is good enough, I'm willing to put up with a lot of job loss. What part of the sticker process do you feel like the AI was most helpful with?
Yeah, so it did two things for me. One is I basically just edited the banner image slightly. I changed it so that it was still just the logo and the name, but it had the accent color for the website on the logo.
Hmm.
Yeah, so it's just a very boring edit, and then it also upscaled the image so that it could actually be used as a sticker, which is something I would have no idea how to do. Um,
That, nor
and
would
it was
I.
so fast, which was so satisfying to me.
All right. So, yeah, this is a classic case of the AI is augmenting us in our jobs and not yet replacing us. But I imagine that this week you have once again looked into questions around AI job displacement. And I am curious what you have been thinking about.
Yeah, so this week, a little bit displacement-y. Basically, a cast of characters that's a very fascinating squad to me, which is separately Gavin Newsom, OpenAI, and also the Pope all have some notable things to say about AI job displacement. The Gavin Newsom did an executive order, OpenAI's announcing some funding, the Pope did an encyclical, but they're all talking about how AI job loss could be a really big deal, and we need to invest in retraining workers.
Yeah. I'm trying to decide if the three folks that you just named, I would consider that a nightmare blunt rotation or more of a dream blunt rotation. Maybe it would depend a little bit on what the conversation was about. But so let's dive into this a little bit. I feel like just for reasons of respect, we may want to start with the Pope. What does His Holiness have to say about this?
Yeah, so yeah, he said we need to invest in retraining, and also companies need to keep in mind the dignity of and pleasantness of work. In
Hmm.
addition to keeping in mind jobs as an AI transition happens. But the thing that was most notable to me is he basically says we should establish social criteria for innovation.
Hmm.
Um, where what that means is in the encyclical, he says every introduction of automation and AI should be accompanied by verifiable measures to protect the employment, retraining, and participation of workers. Um,
And what do you take that to mean?
Yeah, so there is some ambiguity here because it's not necessarily saying whether this is in the hands of the companies or the government, but basically what he's saying is if AI is being deployed that like really has a chance of automating people's jobs, like there needs to be a measure to mitigate this at the time the AI is deployed, like at the
Mm,
time a big new tech change comes. And like it would be probably bad and irresponsible to just have that innovation without it being pretty clear that you have a plan to protect people.
right. Well, look, if I know one thing about American corporations, is that they are laser focused on the dignity of their workers. So I feel pretty good about this one coming true. Let's talk about the OpenAI Foundation. What are they looking at doing?
Yeah, so they're dedicating $250 million in funding to new economic futures in the age of AI. They had one quote to me that freaked me out, which is the current pace of change means the window to get this right is shorter than we're used to, and the cost of getting it wrong is immense. Which is,
Oh, good.
it's very classic OpenAI language, but I was like, guys,
Relax. Yeah. But
yeah.
maybe we shouldn't relax. Maybe we do need to be thinking about this right now. Um, so okay, so interesting. So they say that like job retraining might be part of the answer, but we're going to need to explore new economic futures. Which, do we have any details on what that would mean?
They bring up some stuff. They say like in the short term they talk about conventional policy solutions like also like things like unemployment insurance, other like sorts of welfare assistance. But then they're like these types of programs are not preparing us for the future where like AI actually does a very large portion of all work. And so we need to try new stuff. One of that is those things is like sovereign wealth funds, like for
Mm.
example, Norway has where like the government basically invests money that is then like distributed to citizens. Uh, they kind of have a lot of it partially because they're starting the program is really vague. They're like, we just may need to rethink how the economy and work happens completely. Which like I see like in fact if AI is doing like 80% of labor, you know.
Sure, we might need that. I mean, I'll say like a sovereign wealth fund appeals to me in the sense that it would just be the government sending me money, which is probably one of the best things the government can do for you. All right, so that's them. And then what did California Governor Gavin Newsom have to say for himself?
Yeah, I mean, it was remarkable to me in this case how aligned Gavin Newsom and OpenAI were.
Mhm.
um, because despite Gavin Newsom being Mr. Billionaire Tax, uh, basically Gavin Newsom made an executive order that called for new investment in and study of retraining programs, in particular for people whose jobs might be eliminated by AI, including like software developers, customer service representatives, marketing and salespeople. Um, but then he also called for investigation into new ideas, including universal basic capital, which yeah would give people stakes in stuff like stocks, bonds, or wealth funds.
I see.
Um,
Okay. So there's some interesting ideas here, and it does seem like job retraining is now a notion that is appearing in more and more places. How effective do we think that sort of just training workers to do other things could be in helping us navigate that transition?
yeah, so it's kind of complicated because job retraining, uh, it basically large government job retraining programs have worked to increase people's earnings.
Hmm.
The like overall literature review find is like the first year of the program, they're usually workers are like in school or something, and so their earnings drop. And then over the next few years, workers like do get a real gain in income. The thing is, when you look at how the evidence for the slice of people whose jobs are getting displaced by AI, or like in general, how this might work out for worker displacement, the picture gets a little bit more complicated. So one of the like best pieces of evidence on this uh, that is this basically study of 20 years of the trade adjustment assistance program uh, in the U.S. Um, which like tries to look at like over 20 years workers who have been displaced by some sort of technological change, how
Hmm.
well does the training program work for them, and then especially compared to a baseline of like a similar demographic.
Okay.
And what it finds is like you get tens of thousands of dollars on average in wage gains. 10 years out from the training program, on average, workers make $50,000 more than people who had never
Hmm.
been in the training program. But then when you go 20 years out after that, the gains disappear basically. Like it
Huh.
returns to baseline.
Now,
Um,
why is that?
so the author of this study, obviously we don't know, but guessed that it was partially the new skills that these workers were being taught for the first 10 years were useful skills, but like actually eventually became obsolete because work
Wow.
kept changing.
Hmm.
Um,
Which is, of course, the fear of AI in general, right? Is that no matter how quickly you're able to like retrain a worker, by that point, the jagged frontier of AI capability will have caught up with that worker, and there's sort of nothing to retrain them to do. That's obviously a very like pessimistic view of this, but like, what views do you have? And now, after you've sort of done this research on the job retraining question.
Yeah, what views do I have? I do think like one thing people try, which is promising, is attempting to shift workers into sectors that aren't that aren't going to be as
Exposed.
displaced. Yeah,
Yeah.
that are like maybe more growing sectors. And we do see some promising early results from those trials, although they're all shorter than this 20-year
Mm.
study. And so we can't actually tell if it outperforms this kind of baseline. Another thing that I think I was really interesting to me is there's the study that came out in May that studied the WIOA, which is one of the biggest programs of the last 10 years on worker retraining, where like currently basically this really big program uh, gets people to earn more money in the field that they're already in. But like this big US government program and like by extrapolation, probably a lot of others that are similar to it, don't shift the field that people actually work in, even though they're trying to like teach them new job skills.
Mm.
It seems like it is actually pretty hard uh, to like, you can, like you can teach someone how to do like a little bit better IT stuff, make a better PowerPoint, etc. But getting them into a different field and also predicting what field will be like a
Mm.
good field to retrain someone into is like really hard.
Right, right. And so, if a field goes away, then the job retraining program may be even less effective. Well, you have the wheels of my mind spinning. Does Platformer need to offer podcast training to displaced plumbers? Like these are the sorts of questions that we need to start asking now. And we will of course welcome the thoughts from the public about that. Well, as always, Ella, a fascinating set of stories to consider. And our guest today, Molly Kinder, has a lot to say about what we might want to do with a workforce that finds itself increasingly at risk of their jobs being automated away. So after the break, my conversation with Molly Kinder. Not sure how to actually use AI at work? Most AI tools promise to save time, but they sit outside your workflow. They're disconnected from how things actually get done, and they don't make your to do list any shorter. Atlassian Rovo works where you work, across Jira, Confluence, and the rest of your stack, securely connected to your company's knowledge, context, and permissions. Turn meeting notes into Jira tickets, draft campaign briefs in Confluence, instantly find the right docs without digging. This isn't generic AI. This is AI that understands how your team actually works. Less searching, less busy work, more progress. That's what an AI native team looks like. Learn more about Rovo at rovo.com. My guest today is Molly Kinder. Till recently, she was a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, where she led a multi-year project on how generative AI is reshaping work and workers and what we should do about it. Before Brookings, she led research on AI and work at New America. Before that, she served in the Obama administration. She writes a Substack called Kinder Futures. And as you'll hear in this conversation, she's about to announce a new initiative to create a plan for what happens if and when AI starts to take jobs. What led me to Molly this week is a piece she wrote on her Substack called The Messy Middle. And basically, she argues that Silicon Valley right now is telling us two stories. One is that it's too early for any real policy response because AI job loss isn't showing up in the data. But then the other story it tells is that we will soon hit this post AGI world of abundance, where the only question is how to redistribute the surplus from these huge AI models. Molly's piece notices that both stories are kind of conveniently skipping over the years in between, right? What happens when this disruption starts? She believes that there's going to be concentrated job losses in the best paid professions, knowledge work, and that that's going to create a political backlash that is potentially larger than the one we saw from deindustrialization when factory jobs started to move overseas and outside of the United States. Like our previous guest, Catherine M. Edwards, Molly argues that the safety net that we have right now is too thin and threadbare and is not going to serve us when these losses start. So, what do we do about it? This is a fascinating conversation from somebody who is neither a total doomer nor a denialist. Like, I find this conversation really refreshing in the realism that Molly is bringing. She'll be the first to admit she doesn't know how quickly the models are going to improve. She doesn't know when the big job losses will start, but she does believe that the time to start thinking about it is now. So that's what we have in store for you today. Here is my conversation with Molly Kinder. Molly Kinder, welcome to Platformer.
Thanks for having me, Casey.
Well, you have spent your year looking at AI and the economy through the lens of the worker. Many of our guests on the show so far have come at it from the technology side. When you look at the economy, how do you think you see it differently than a Silicon Valley technologist might?
I that's a great question, Casey. So my whole approach to my research is to start with the individual. So I come at this not only what sort of I'm held responsible at the end of the day for my work is making sure I'm promoting what I think is right for society and the individual, but a lot of my approach to my scholarship is interviewing people. So I spend a
Mm,
lot of time talking to people of all backgrounds, all stripes about how AI is impacting them and what they want from the future. So I think I come at this both grounded in a sense of my scholarship is about how do we make sure this is a technology that will people will benefit from and not be harmed by. And I'm ruthlessly focused on what this technology at the end of the day is going to mean to individuals, to workers, to families. So I think that's probably a slight distinction. And I spend
yeah.
a lot of my time in dialogue with individuals as well. And not just in Silicon Valley, although, of course, AI is impacting the tech sector, but really a much broader range of occupations and people.
Yeah, I mean, as a journalist, I'm always telling people the interview is one of the most powerful technologies that we have. So I'm
It's
I'm glad
so
to see
true,
you
Casey.
deploying it. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
no, for sure. It's a little bit, atypical for my role at the Brookings Institution. I mean, we pride ourselves in being scholars and data and experts, but I actually think it's really critical. You miss things if you don't get out into the real world and talk to real people.
Yeah, yeah. There's more to life than reading X.com. So let me get to the piece that led me to reach out to you and talk today. You wrote a piece recently about what you call the messy middle of the AI transition that you argue is about to come. What is the messy middle?
Yeah, thanks, Casey. So I wrote this piece in part because I've been so frustrated by the state of the AI and jobs conversation. And I think you must be too, because you've been doing this great series bringing perspectives. I feel like we're in this giant seesaw where, one group of people or one journalist will put something out that declares an apocalypse is coming and takes a really extreme view. And then the other side will say, no, the apocalypse isn't coming, so there's nothing to see here. So we go from sort of really extreme, like all jobs are going away very soon, and that's awful, to you're overreacting, there's nothing to see here. And I'm calling out the messy middle both to stake out a more reasonable middle ground between these two extremes,
But also, I was talking about a time period. So I think we are in reality, this like time T0 right now. What we're in is such early days of this labor market transition that you almost can't see much of an evidence of labor market disruption yet. So everyone's fearful, but we're not yet seeing a lot of labor market impact. I would say reality three, and credit to my colleague Pollock Shaw for coming up with this R1, R2, R3 framing. R3 is what I think a lot of Silicon Valley describes, this world of post AGI where essentially robots and AI can do everything. And that's the jobs apocalypse narrative that sort of we're debating over and over whether that's realistic. I actually think what we're really entering is this messy middle period. It's a
Mm.
world in which AI gets better. It's more capable of taking on more work, but we don't overnight see a jobs apocalypse. Instead, we find something that's still painful, but it's more narrow. It's sort of a world of partial automation where AI starts to get capable enough to do certain types of jobs. And that is still very painful. A world where most jobs are intact, but there's a concentrated loss is still a world that is politically, societally, and economically explosive. So I'm
Mm.
trying to call attention to this messy middle period, which could last for decades. Depends on how good the
Hmm.
technology gets. But it is still one that we have to take seriously because even a world where we don't see a full jobs apocalypse, if we're seeing a lot of pain in the knowledge sector or to early career, that is still going to be something that we're going to feel as a country and that we're not prepared for.
Yeah. You argue that this middle period of AI disruption is going to hit white collar workers much harder than blue collar workers. Make the case for why you think that is.
Yeah, and I would say this is just what is going to go first. And when you look at ChatGPT world technologies, large language models, we've got lots of data. OpenAI made public a data set that looked at every task across the economy and its task exposure. And then you can aggregate that up to individual jobs and individual sectors. And it's just basically saying, is this the kind of job where you can use a version of ChatGPT to save a bunch of time? And if you look at that, and I have a chart in the Substack that I wrote, coming from some research I did at Brookings with some colleagues there, if you look at the kind of sectors that are most exposed, where we're going to see the most usage, and for good or bad, in terms of job security, it is by and large the knowledge sectors. It is at a computer. The way my framing is, if you can do your job locked in a closet with a computer, eventually you're probably going to be in trouble. So it's the really computer based work. Most of that is kind of bachelor's degrees, law, finance, consulting, sales. There's a big component of it that's more clerical back office. That's not usually a BA associated with that, and I can talk more about why that's something we need to focus on. What you see as not really that exposed, and it's reflected in the data of usage, are blue collar jobs, physical jobs, service sector jobs, jobs that you have to show up in a workplace, whether it's a restaurant or a haircut salon, or repair shop. Those are jobs where ChatGPT is not really going to help you do very much.
Mhm.
Eventually, we're certainly going to see robotics enter the picture. I don't have a crystal ball. We don't have good data on that. I think we're seeing much faster advancements in computer based knowledge work. So that's what I see as the frontier. That's where we're already seeing. And I think that's going to hit and be disruptive first to those computer based knowledge jobs and that clerical role.
And that's pretty intuitive to me, right? Like I now spend a fair amount of time just gently testing these models to see which parts of my job they can do, and they
Yeah.
can do more of it today than they could a year ago, right? So I think
Same,
it's
Casey.
yeah,
Same.
yeah,
I do a
yeah.
lot
So
of my work at a computer, and it's the stuff at the computer that it's getting remarkably good at.
yeah, so I mean, I think we have to keep our eye on that trend line. Can you sketch out like some of the implications of maybe
Sure.
white collar work falling to automation first, and like how that might contribute to messiness?
Yeah, so let me first give a little bit of a historical perspective to show why this is such a change if this does happen. And again, I want to caveat I don't have a crystal ball. Nobody can fully predict the future. There's lots of ways, the impacts on white collar may be softer than I imagine. I'm also not saying it's all happening tomorrow. I think we're at the precipice of a transformation. the possibility of commoditizing cognition is something I talk about in the paper. It's not overnight. This is, though, where I see the technology going. If you look at so I'm in my mid 40s. So I was born in 1979. In the paper, I show a chart, a figure that goes back 150 years, and it looks at what types of jobs dominated the labor market in the US over time. And it shows the sort of ups and downs and changes. And since I was born in around 1980, you see this huge surge of knowledge and professional jobs, the kind of white collar jobs we think of that dominate now the economy, and business and finance and accounting and law. And what we saw before was, first there was an agriculture revolution, and sort of that was mechanized. And then we had tons of blue collar employment. I mean, upwards of a third of all employment was in manufacturing and blue collar. Then we saw this big decline. We've had this huge increase in knowledge jobs since basically the invention of the computer. And we've called this skill bias technological change. Up until the moment ChatGPT was launched, I've always considered computers boosting the knowledge worker. It made them more productive. It made them more in demand. It allowed them to be, here I am typing away on my computer. I'm going faster and more productive. But the computer didn't do my job. My brain did my job. In comparison, a lot of jobs that have gone away were substituted by computers. So if you think about a lawyer, in the 1980s, you probably had one lawyer and one legal secretary. The legal secretary did all the typing, did all the scheduling, did the dictation. Computers came along and replaced a lot of that work. And it made the lawyer more productive and more in demand. So we've had this period of time where routine jobs were substituted, but we've had this sense. You had James Manuka on your pod, and he was the author of a really big McKinsey study pre-ChatGPT, and that played into this. Routine jobs in the middle were being displaced, but knowledge jobs were growing. They were sort of the winners of the computer era. ChatGPT and the technology like that has come along, large language models, potentially could flip that on its head. For the first time, and it's not totally there yet, but Casey, you and I feel it in our knowledge jobs. What does Claude, the 10th version of Claude, look like? Where are we going to be in 5 years? Can it now lawyer? Before computers helped the lawyer be the brilliant mind and do the work faster and with more resources, are we going to get to a point where the computer itself, through these technologies, actually can substitute for some of that cognition that was so specialized? We have not seen that before. That's not the way technology has gone over the last several decades. If that does happen, I talk about the political economy impacts of that. I think it can be earth-shattering, Casey. First, I think we have this notion of an American dream, that we have this meritocracy. Like, my grandparents were uneducated immigrants from Ireland. Their passion was to work blue-collar jobs and send their kids to college, and then they all owned homes. This is sort of the path we have. And there has been a sense of it's worth it to take out a ton of debt for college because you have this secure upper middle class existence if you do.
Right.
This could upend all of that. I mean, not all of that, because I think there's versions of some of these jobs will be boosted. But if we really start to see the technology capable of commoditizing some of that cognition, I think we have a explosive situation on our hand if the jobs that are rising aren't the same pay and stature and eligibility that the jobs are going away. And I think we have some precedent in history with manufacturing to learn that lesson.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that to some degree, like, this has already started to arrive, right? Like, we see the boos at AI speakers at commencements when the mention of AI comes up. I think those boos are rooted in the fear that I'm not going to be able to achieve the American dream
100%.
anymore, right?
Yeah.
Some of this has even spilled over into violence. I think it undergirds a lot of the opposition to data centers. So I do hope that policymakers are paying attention to that, because, like, in a very real way, that nothing that you said is even really that speculative.
No, it's not that speculative. And I think the point is, I'm not saying we're there today. The
Yeah.
technology is not, we're in the earliest innings of this marathon. But where we think we're going is, if the labs are right, and these versions are going to continue to get smarter and smarter, and they're going to rival a professor, a think tank scholar, a market research analyst, a lawyer, a doctor diagnosing a disease. These are some of the most coveted jobs across the entire economy. If you think about what undergrads, I've interviewed so many young people in college and after who are terribly fearful of this. I mean, if you have to take into account where we are as a country, affordability is everyone's anxiety. We've gotten to the
Mm.
point because of the hollowing out of those middle class jobs and manufacturing and clerical work. Really, what are the best ways that you can afford a home and take your kids to Disney World, which is everyone's kind of core, metric is, can I afford a home? Can I raise a family? Could I maybe take them on a vacation? And honestly, upper middle class jobs, the route to get there typically are these college educated routes. And these are coveted. These are jobs people want. This isn't saying, oh, reduce my drudgery. This is what and right at a moment where young people are telling you, look, it's already so preposterously expensive to afford a home. I'm doing
Mm.
everything I was told to do. I'm studying hard. I'm getting these good grades. I'm choosing these majors that should put me on this path to one day afford the basics of the American dream. Is AI going to come in and rip that away from me? And so I think there's a lot of anxiety that, um, if we take away the jobs people want, what is going to be left over? Sure, there's a possibility new jobs come online. Maybe it won't be so hard to switch, but fundamentally, I think what people want is the ability to provide for themselves and their family and have some hope that their kids are going to do better than them. And there's a lot of anxiety about AI because of the potential for it in the coming years to really disrupt the American dream.
So you mentioned our conversation that we had with James Manyika, who's the senior vice president of research for technology and society at Google. And I suspect if he were here, he might tell us to tap the brakes a little bit. Like a lot of James's research tries to tease out the difference between automating a task and automating a
Yeah.
job. And what he says is that tasks are definitely getting easier to automate. Like you and I, Molly, I'm sure have already automated a number of tasks in our lives. And yet we do still have our jobs. And so James just seems to think that this is going to play out for a pretty long time and that the economy will be less susceptible to this mass automation of white collar work in the near term. So I'm curious what you make of that critique because it does seem like it is at the crux of what we are actually going to see in the next few years.
Well, first, I really respect James. I followed his work for decades. Some of what James said I agreed with and some I disagreed with. I think there are certainly aspects of knowledge work, for instance, that's not terribly automatable. And this is all already in the data. When I think about my job, some of my job is sitting in a computer and thinking and researching and writing and going really deep to try to think about what do we do for young people. And then there are parts of my job that are very relationship based. There are a lot about being physically present, speaking, fundraising, building partnerships. It is those types of tasks in my job, I guess you could say, that are not automatable anytime in the near future. I think, and I do think there are some instances where, as some of the work that you do gets automated, you just go to a higher level of abstraction. I think all of that is potentially true. There's also some demand issues. Maybe if lawyers get, very productive and it all becomes cheaper, we demand more. All of those things I think are true. I think when I listened to Aaron and James, part of what I think was though missing a little bit is project ourselves out a few years. We are still talking about the early days. The doctor, that was the example Aaron used. Of course, every doctor wants to save time on note taking. That's not why doctors are fearful of their job. And I've talked to many in the medical profession. What strikes fear in doctors or nurses is AI going to get good at the part of my job that I think of as the crux of my job, where I really add value? There hasn't been an academic study yet where the human bests AI in diagnosing a disease. There's lots of examples in the medical profession of AI being better at doing the hardest parts, the stuff that doctors enjoy the most. A lot of doctors have said they enjoy the diagnosing. And that's not the same thing as saying, let's just get rid of the sort of routine part of our job and do more of the good. When I talk to creatives, they're worried about the thing they love about their job being substituted. And even for me, now I'm 46. I'm very senior in my job. I have a lot of, interpersonal parts of my job. I didn't for the first 15 years of my career. It was mostly sitting at a computer and typing. And so I think what a lot of people fear is not where we are today in this trajectory. If AI gets better and better I can easily see it when I'll have a 2-hour conversation with Claude going really deep on some policy areas. And I sometimes walk away and think that is like talking to a scholar at Brookings. And this is still
Mhm.
early days. It is
Mhm.
humbling. It is genuinely humbling to see how smart it is getting. And so I think that is what has been missing in some of the previous discussions as an acknowledgement of what happens if AI gets better at what makes you special in
Yeah.
your job and what you
Yeah.
love. Doesn't mean all jobs are going away, but I think in certain realms, it's going to be very automating.
This is really important, and I think this accounts for, like, 85% of the uncertainty around this conversation is lots of folks I speak to believe, and I think I believe as well, we are living through a period of exponential improvement in large language models, and it is just basically impossible to predict the future when you are living through exponential change, right?
Yeah,
The
that's true.
ground keeps shifting from underneath you. You mentioned talking to Claude and how humbling it can be to talk to it already. Anthropic has a model called Mythos that they have not released to the public yet that they
Yeah.
say is sort of a step change. How might this conversation be different if we had it in 6 months once people have tried to automate their tasks with a model of that caliber? So it just gets really, really tricky. And one reason why I wanted to have you on the show is I think if you work at a technology company, your incentive is to tell me, no, 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 Casey, don't worry, it's going to be fine. Like, yes, there's going to be a lot of change, but like you are going to keep your job so you can calm down. You don't have to try to, destroy the data center that we're building in your community. You don't have to boo us at graduation, right? But I think what's important about what you're saying is that if the technology improves rapidly enough, that sort of jagged frontier is going to catch up to a staggering amount of tasks at least, and then at some point that probably tips over into a full job.
Yeah, I mean, I also, you know, I think that your listeners should understand there are so many different types of jobs out there, and the way AI is going to impact jobs is going to be very different in different sectors. And it doesn't. I think another thing that I worry about is this idea of de-skilling. That if the cognitive part of your job, the really hard cognitive part, can be deferred to Claude, you might not need as much education experience, and that becomes a lower paying job. And that's
Hmm.
something I'm already hearing in the healthcare space. I've heard examples
Hmm.
from doctors telling me a completely untrained person off the street being guided by, generative AI to perform an ultrasound. That's a $85,000 a year job
Hmm.
that requires a year of post secondary. If you can just
Hmm.
de-skill jobs, that's another issue. There's a lot of different ways this could play out. I don't think we are heading into a jobs apocalypse. Right now, my use of AI makes me better in my job. I think there's
Hmm.
lots of upsides. I think though the notion that there's nothing to see here just because we're not heading into a jobs apocalypse, it won't take that much. If a handful of really coveted sectors start seeing a displacement of some talent, I think what the whole public is on pins and needles. Everyone's worried about this. They're looking for the first real proof that what they fear in their gut is coming is going to happen. My point is if policymakers and politicians are not ready with a response, they don't, and if they see that this is going to be a repeat of social media where, kids were harmed for 10 years with nothing, a repeat of deindustrialization where good jobs in the heartland were lost because of trade and automation, and we did basically nothing to stop that or respond to it, well, I think people are going to lose faith and they're going to turn even more against AI. I think it's imperative that you said it. I've heard you say it many times, Casey. What's the plan? If jobs are lost, one of the things I wanted to highlight in my piece is if you do lose your job and you are making 200,000 a year and you have a graduate degree or an undergraduate degree and you're very specialized and you can't just slip into something else, your potential fall from that livelihood and your home mortgage and what you're able to support in your family could fall pretty precipitously. And we have
Yeah.
a really threadbare safety net, and there is no unwritten rule that says you get to get another job at the same pay. Imagine if that repeats over enough people. It doesn't have to be a jobs apocalypse for people to feel that what they hold dear is slipping away.
Absolutely. Our previous episode with the labor economist Catherine Ann Edwards, we talk quite a bit about how threadbare that safety net is, and what some policy solutions might be. And I want to get to your own policy thoughts later. I thought before we move on, though, some folks might be curious. I feel like almost everyone I know has at least one eye on this question of how good is the AI at my job, and is that starting to show up in the productivity statistics?
Yeah.
You published research about how the data suggests that there is no jobs apocalypse yet. But I'm curious, like, what signals are you looking at to
Yeah.
serve as a kind of early warning
Early
system?
warning.
Like, when it
Yeah.
shows up, like, where will it appear first?
Yeah. So, just to credit my colleagues at the Yale Budget Lab, Martha Gimbel, and Maddie and Joshua did an incredible job of taking aggregate labor market data and basically gut checking, is the house on fire? And the answer is it
Mm.
is not. We are not seeing economy-wide labor market disruption. And I don't, and our starting point is we shouldn't expect to 3 years in. This is really early days. I think it's going to be some time before at a macro scale, when you zoom out, you're really going to see this. I say it's almost like that methodology would tell if the whole house was on fire, but not if there was like a stove fire in one individual room that was just like an early flame. I'm looking at individual sectors where adoption is very high.
Huh.
So, for instance, I want to know the early moving. Right now, we have very wide variance in how quickly certain sectors are truly adopting AI versus others. I'm looking at customer service and some of these back office functions where it's
Mm.
not so much that individuals in those sectors are using Claude all the time. It's that employers are automating from the back end a lot of that work. So that's a barometer to me. I'm looking at sectors like obviously software engineering and the tech sector, but also marketing, market research, finance, to some extent law, though I don't expect to see much impact there. The challenge is our labor market data, when you start getting kind of granular, is not very recent and not very good. But we're
Hmm.
trying to that's where I'm looking to see we should look at the sectors where AI is moving the fastest and ask the question, what's happening there? And that's
Yeah.
where I'd like to see more evidence in the coming year. I expect to start seeing,
Yeah.
particularly in early career, more impacts, and sort of over the next 1 to 3 years, more impact beyond that.
Yeah. Interestingly, it seems like the number of postings for software engineers are
It's going
up
up.
in
Yeah.
2026. Yeah. Which, I don't know how much we should make of that because, again, like we have the models that we have now. They can do what they do. It's really impressive. They're automating tasks. They haven't automated a job. And yeah, it's like, well, if we were about to see the beginning of something really, really disruptive, that does seem like a place where you might see it first. And so it at least seems notable that we haven't
It
seen it
is.
so far in 2026. Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually very interesting. It's something that sort of should catch us all. No matter what our opinions are, we should be grounded in the data. So
Yeah.
I'm following that very closely.
Yeah. So you opened up your piece by describing interactions you had with two people. As someone who was, I believe, almost 50, a former USAID official who was looking at a 60% pay cut to become a teacher after Doge took away their job. And then also a 60-something laid off semiconductor engineer who was driving your Uber to Menlo Park and whose
Yeah.
job may itself be disrupted before too long by Waymo. What about those interactions made you feel like these could be leading indicators of what we're about to see?
Yeah, I use those as examples of how challenging it will be if we do see impacts in the white collar sector. And I chose both of them because they were real people I met in real time who were both having a very difficult time in the quote unquote transition. Neither of them lost their job because of AI, but I thought they're the type of white collar workers. If we start seeing impacts there, I think they reveal how challenging this is going to be. They're specialized. They had very specialized skill sets. When my neighbor and friend who worked for USAID lost her job, that entire sector was dismantled because of Doge. Everyone is having a hard time. When I asked what people were doing, many had to move to cheaper cities, take big pay cuts. A lot of people haven't found another job. There's some people managing restaurants, trying to totally repurpose into something else. And she really struggled to find anything where it could translate. And what's really difficult, and the semiconductor engineer really felt he was facing age discrimination. And from its stories, I would give a lot of credence to that.
Mhm.
Both of them had these salaries that were about 200K. It's really tough to maintain that standard of living if you don't find something equivalent. And both of them were deeply struggling to do that. And they were ending in these places where the delta between their previous salary and where they were was enormous. So the Uber
Mhm.
driver was now making between 30 and 40,000 a year, couldn't even pay his Cobra. I mean, massive
Mhm.
sacrifice. And at that age, in your 60s, still 5 years before he could retire, what is retraining? Are you really going to retrain? This friend who's more closer to my age, who has kids, she's a sconce in the neighborhood. It would be a big change for her family. The best she could come up with, I mean, both of their unemployment benefits ran out at 6 months, not enough time for them to find another job. And the best this neighbor of mine could come up with was Virginia has a program where you can, with a BA, basically become a teacher, but it would be a
Mhm.
60% pay cut. And what I'm trying to emphasize here is this is not easy. If what we
Mhm.
see, and I don't have a crystal ball, but imagine a world in, I don't know, 5 years or 4 years, if these technologies get better and their general purpose, if people with specialized knowledge careers are displaced, how easy is it going to be for them to switch into something else? If it's general purpose, I'm probably going to do something similar. Our safety net is terrible. And the other thing I want to flag, Casey, why I say this is different this time, we've never had a wave of disruption from technology that hit this part of the labor market. Most
Yeah.
of our government programs are like skilled apprenticeships and infrastructure jobs, building a data center. And, I mean, when I ask these folks, do you want those jobs? They say, no, we really don't even have an infrastructure designed for knowledge workers. So it's quite a painful transition.
Yeah, well, and we'll get to what you think of as good solutions in a minute, but I want to start with two that you hate. So, some folks will tell people who are caught up in a predicament like this to consider picking up a trade, become a
Yeah.
plumber or an electrician. You call this one of the laziest moves in the discourse.
Yeah.
Why? Why doesn't this idea scale?
Yeah, so I've heard this. I can't tell you the number of times, Casey. Like a flippant, like, you knowledge workers, just go or go be a plumber or an electrician. We have a dearth of those. We need people. And my point is that those skilled trades cannot be a mass market sponge for displacement for a number of reasons. Number one, yes, we need more plumbers and electricians. It also takes many, many years to train for this. There's a dearth of even trainers to train. So if everyone who was in the knowledge sector, or all the 18-year-olds who were suddenly afraid to go to college, everyone rushes in to be a plumber or an electrician, two things could happen. One, the bottleneck to get people through all that training is going to limit how many people can get through. And two, even if you could somehow scale the training, make it much faster. So instead of a 4 years, AI gives you glasses and, you just kind of make it much faster and you just flood the market with plumbers and electricians. There goes the wage premium. The reason why people want to be a plumber or an electrician is because it's a really good middle class life. If suddenly everyone is a plumber or an electrician, it's no longer a wage premium. So yes, is it the right fit for some people? Absolutely. If I was an 18-year-old and I was choosing between going $400,000 in debt, and if I had a predisposition to that work, sure. There might be
Hmm.
some people with enough time in their career. It's a good 4 years often to be trained. And so I think it's just a lazy, well, if
Yeah.
everyone who's potentially displaced does these two jobs, it cannot really absorb all of it. I actually ran some numbers to see, the college going population versus the number of people that are needed in the skilled trades. And there's no comparison. So I think it's a good, solid option for some people. I think a lot of people will find it attractive given its security. It cannot be the mass sponge for everybody.
Right. We don't need like a plumber every three houses, like
No,
in the
we don't.
neighborhood. Yeah.
No, no, no,
Yeah.
exactly. No, and I think a lot of this, I think one of the things I don't like in the discourse is when everything gets down to like individual recommendations. Like, what would
Hmm.
you tell a college student?
Yeah.
My job is to think about the composition of the labor market. Do we have enough of the jobs people want? And how do we make sure we do? Because if everyone's just, if it's a game of musical chairs and just some people get the remaining scraps, that's really not going to work at scale.
Right. I did have a question in here about what like a new college grad should do and if they have a CS degree, but I will skip that now that I
Skip
understand
it.
that's a
You know
lazy
what, Casey?
question. Yeah.
I actually, it's a lazy question. My thing that's more interesting is what should we
Yeah.
do as a country to make sure there
Yeah.
are good opportunities for those young people? I don't think we should
Yeah.
leave it on the individual. That's the way I
Yeah.
work. But
I think that is well said. So let's talk about the other idea that you hate, which is
okay,
called universal basic income.
yeah,
The yeah you and one of the arguments that you make is that we're heading into a kind of inverse of COVID situation that might disrupt the way that you might think UBI could go. So tell us a little bit about
sure.
why you don't like the UBI solution.
Well, what I was reacting to was kind of the San Francisco consensus I hear when I'm engaged in a conversation with someone who's very AGI pilled, very sort of in the AI space, and thinks we're going right to that post AGI reality. When I say, oh, my job is to think about policy solutions in this interim period, for instance, like what do we do about young people who are, need to get on the career ladder? Or what about these displaced knowledge workers? They say, well, no, I mean, we just go straight to UBI. We get checks big enough for everybody that replaces essentially their entire full income. And it's universal. Everyone gets it. And so that's partly my motivation of writing this piece is if we're not skipping right to a world where nobody works and the answer is everyone gets a check, if instead you're in the messy middle, which is some jobs are disrupted and you have this concentrated pain. And I give the historical parallel. It's just like when in the 1980s through 2000s, when we lost in a concentrated way jobs in the heartland and manufacturing. Overall, the economy was fine and overall jobs were fine. You just had this concentrated loss in the heartland. If we have this partial automation, and I use the example of COVID because I've been thinking a lot about how the doing your job locked in a closet in a computer are the folks
Mm.
who could stay home during the pandemic. They didn't have to
Yeah.
show up into a workplace and risk the virus. Actually, what I researched at Brookings during the pandemic was essential workers. I spent all my time with
Mm.
grocery workers and care workers and really arguing that they deserved a living wage and safety and whatnot. And the folks who had to show up into the office or into a restaurant or a hospital or, you name the sort of essential workplace, almost by definition, computers can't do that job because you had to be in person. And the folks who were the most safe from the virus, who could take all their meetings at home virtually or were mostly typing on a spreadsheet or whatnot, those are the things that AI is best at. So what we have just learned in the early, in this last decade was the economy literally cannot function without all of those tens of millions of people showing up in hospitals and telephone repair and food manufacturing and farming and public safety and schooling. All these critical infrastructures by and large are not the ones that are on the front lines of AI displacement in the early days. I can't predict if robots are going to suddenly take over everything.
Mm.
It's the laptop class that was not declared essential that are the most at risk. So what happens if you have, and again, I can't predict, is it mild displacement in knowledge work? Is it, more extreme? But if you see a lot more examples of the people with the $150,000 to $200,000 incomes who lose their livelihood and can't connect to another job, the idea that everyone in society gets a check large enough to replace their lost wages means why in the world would anybody show up to still do the policing, the construction of the house, the hospital jobs for way less money than that? And we live in a country, I don't agree with this value, but we live in a country where distributing checks for people not to work tends not to be very favorable in America. So how
Yeah.
politically sustainable is it for all the folks with essential jobs earning quite modest wages to keep working for $40,000 a year or $60,000 a year? And can we in perpetuity send checks to the $200,000 software engineer to not work? We end up in this very messy situation. So it's not that I don't think we need to have some kind of compensation. It's the idea that we can just give checks large enough to replace everyone's income in a world that's the messy middle. You've just destroyed the labor market. So
Yeah.
I think what we need are more targeted interventions that support those who might be in the midst of the messy middle. If we do get to a reality 3 where literally no one works, of course we need some kind of full income replacement. But I think we're facing something much trickier in the messy middle.
Well, let's talk about another a solution that has been proposed recently.
Yeah.
Senator Bernie Sanders said this month that he will soon be unveiling a proposal to take equity stakes in the major US AI labs and create a sovereign wealth fund that would share dividends with the US people. What do you make of that idea?
I would separate two really pressing policy challenges that we face right now. One is, how do ordinary people across society benefit from the gains of AI? There is going
Mhm.
to be a phenomenal amount of wealth that's going to be generated post IPO in San Francisco. I mean, Casey, you live amongst it, you know where this is going. Biggest
Yeah.
IPOs in history, huge amounts of wealth. I think we face a society wide question of how do we make sure that doesn't just benefit a few thousand people in San Francisco? Um, and I think just generally, how do we make sure this technology is one that's benefiting all of us? It's not just going to shareholders. Those are a set of questions about how do we share the surplus from AI. I would separate that from how do we handle the concentrated pain that will come from people on the losing end of job disruption. Those are not the same thing. For instance, if you think about something like a sovereign wealth fund or some kind of dividend fund, which I'm supportive of this notion of how do we make sure this wealth benefits everybody, everyone's going to get some kind of amount. It's not going to be enough to replace your income. It's going to just be something we all benefit from. I think we face a really big question in society, which is how do we make, there are going to be some people really on the losing end of this, and their pain is going to be acute and real, and it's going to create societal, economic, and political challenges. We have to figure out how to capture some of the gains to invest in solutions that help them. That's not going to be the same thing as a small check to everybody. So I would
Uh,
just separate those things. I care deeply about this question of making sure ordinary Americans benefit. Lots of policy ideas on the table. I think we can debate which one is best. I think there's a separate question, which is how do we make sure we help people navigate who might be on the losing end, knowing we messed up so badly deindustrialization and it was a
yeah.
wreck.
Yeah.
It was a total mess. We're bad at this. And so we have to figure out in the messy middle, how do we not leave people behind? That's young people who feel like they can't start a future. It's any knowledge worker who could lose their job and not find another good one. It's these high school educated women across the country as bookkeepers and medical coders. Those are the best jobs for high school educated women. What's going to
Mm.
replace them? So I would separate those things out.
Got it. Okay. Well, so then let's now that there's been an appropriate amount of buildup, what do you
Yeah.
think are some good ideas to handle the job disruptions that may come?
So I have a few categories that I'm playing with. One is I think I've been really impressed with some of David Shore's polling. I'm not sure if you've seen some of his pollings that
Hmm.
shows kind of where the American people are. When I talk to the American public, I hear all the time anxiety that comes in threefold. One is people already in their working lives, like you and me, Casey, who worry about a game of Russian roulette. Am I going to be the person that one day wakes up and some version of Claude can do my job? There's a real anxiety of, my fragility. Am I going to end up as the Uber driver who just, my income just plunged? Second thing is young people who are super fearful that the American dream is just being pulled. They're the collateral damage of AI progress. Shareholders could benefit if you replace young people with Claude, but what happens to those young people? And then I would say, as a parent of three kids, 11 and under, a lot of parents are bewildered. How do we even prepare our kids for a future? What even is the point of school? What do we do to set our kids up? So there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of fear. And what's riding through this is people are not asking for a check and they're not asking for retraining. They're asking to have some security in a world where things are really expensive. They want to keep a job. So the first bucket I would say are, what are really creative policy interventions that slow down and manage the pace of disruption before it even happens? I think we are really bad as a country of, once the displacement happens, figuring out what to do. I don't believe in just putting up protectionist walls. Like, we shouldn't just have certain jobs that, just because they're powerful, they say no one can use AI for any legal advice. I don't believe in those kind of solutions, but I do believe there are ways that we can better manage, have higher expectations for employers in terms of retention or how much they have to do to try to repurpose someone before they lose their job. I think the same holds for young people. I am passionate about ideas that make sure young people are just not the collateral damage. How can we hold employers accountable to not just cut learning opportunities just because they can? So I have some big ideas. I have this idea for a workforce reinvestment fund. Sectors that are cutting young people, they've got to pay in You only get the money back if you offer some kind of white collar apprenticeship for young people.
Mm.
I was really
Mhm.
excited to see that Mallory McMorrow and Michigan just made that part of her big campaign for Senate.
Mm.
David Shore ran the polling for me. It's wildly popular. I like these
Mm.
ideas. How can you change the incentives through tax, through incentives, through regulation? So we're not just burning through people and just, I think the more we can manage that pace, the better. Second
Yeah.
thing is, I'm sure Catherine talked about that. We really have to fix the safety net. It's
Yeah.
clear that we don't do a good job. Lots of ideas on the table. I believe wage insurance for older people is a must. We're going to have to be a lot more generous. As you get older, it's much harder to transition. Wage insurance basically gives you a way to take another job at a lower rate, but still keep some of your previous wage.
Mm.
Third thing is that no one is really talking about, but this is, Casey, where my mind is going, including from the Pope's encyclical and some of the guidance about how work is essential. If we really see a pretty serious disruption to the white collar jobs, and we're not seeing the market just create more jobs at that level, if we might see more service jobs or more worse jobs, but we really have a dearth of good jobs, I think government's going to have to figure out some way to provide good jobs. And
Mm.
something that I want to do in my new organization is do a lot of experimentation and testing. And what would that look like? How can we effectively figure out, like, we have industrial policy to try to create infrastructure jobs to help men who lost jobs in manufacturing. What's the version of that for white collar work? How can we
Mm.
invest in the creation? It could be that they are solving social problems. I mean, we got plenty of
Mm.
problems to solve. We can decide we
Mm.
want to tackle them, but at what wage? Through what mechanism? How would we do it? So I want to play around with some of that. Um, and then I do think there's some really big. The final bucket is, I think we have some really big questions around inequality. How are we going to create the surplus? How are we going to capture some of this surplus to reinvest to make sure we're creating good jobs? We have a better safety net, whether it's healthcare people need or more sort of free apprenticeships. There's a lot of big ideas we have to figure out in terms of sort of how we make sure that the upside is shared and we can actually fund it. So those are some of my big ideas.
Those are really fun to think about. It struck me when you were talking about incentivizing companies to create white collar apprenticeship programs that a reason why I think people would like that is that like older workers often really enjoyed being mentors. And I think
Yeah,
there is a fear that a world where the workplace starts to get automated away, you're starting to lose part of what makes jobs fun, or at least what can make a good
totally.
job fun, right? Which is, trying to teach younger people a thing or two winds up being really satisfying. So there may just be a way to like, harness what people actually like about their work to create programs that, kind of help us navigate that change.
I mean, Casey, I think that's a brilliant idea. And the way I came up with the notion of I call it like a medical residency for white collar, is if you think about how most white collar sectors train young people, it's computer based stuff that's now highly automatable. It's spreadsheets, it's drafts. That stuff is getting replaced. I think young people are going to need to be taught to do the higher level strategy, the presenting in court, and they're going to need mentorship. They're going to need a training. And it's not cheap to do that, but I think companies owe it to the next generation to not just rip it away. And I think you're right, Casey. I think if you could empower some of your staff, like I talked to folks in the legal field, they said, why not repurpose pro bono law to be a training ground for young,
Mm.
associates who aren't going to be doing the document reviews anymore? I'm sure you'd have a bunch of mid-level lawyers who'd be delighted to teach that. But I don't think companies are going to do it on their own. I believe we might
Yeah.
have to be a little bit more heavy-handed to say, this is, there's a sort of a market failure. If one company trains, someone else can just poach that employee. So I think we might have to step in and say, this is unacceptable. We're gonna sort of have government policy make sure employers are not leaving behind the next generation.
The typical objection to this kind of policy ideas, or at least a challenge that gets made to them, is like, okay, well, like, yeah, but like, when is the U.S. Congress, going to actually pass that law, and when is the president going to sign it? At the same time, I just sort of think if unemployment goes up by like 2, 3, 4 percentage points, we might just find ourselves living in a completely different political reality, and things that
Oh
seem
no,
impossible now might get
what
like quite possible very quickly.
Casey, I agree. And I say this in my piece that the class of people that could be really negatively impacted first are very politically connected. There is no cultural or geographic distance between the people in power and their children who might not be able to get a job or their neighbors who could lose them. Unlike in deindustrialization in the Midwest, it was overlooked for far too long. This is a politically loud, important to both parties part of the electorate. I think the Overton window is going to expand. One strategy I'm taking is starting with the more forward-leaning mayors and governors to start trying out these approaches. And I've already heard from some mayors and governors interested, for instance, in some of these ideas about young people. I also have an idea of repurposing national service programs to look more like the legal aid clinic model, where yes, young people are serving society, but they're getting professional skills. They're staying on that career ladder. There's a lot of interest. And so I think what we need to do right now is while we have, before the Overton window is really big, find the leaders, get them to start trying these things. And by the time we really see this in the job numbers, we have big ideas ready to go and scale. And you're right. I mean, it feels like waiting for Godot sometimes on Congress, but this could look really different in a few years. And I think the place to experiment and lead is probably at the state level for now. We also have a presidential election coming up, Casey, and this is going to be one of the hottest issues. It's an open primary in both parties. Every individual running for president is going to need new ideas. It's going to be the battle of ideas. This is going to be one of the hot topics. So I do have some faith that we're going to start seeing more solutions and more focus on this.
Well, as we sort of start to come to a close here, we always try to break news on the Platformer Pod, and you mentioned that you might have a new organization. So what can you tell us about what you're up to, Molly?
Yeah. So, Casey, for the last 3 years, I've had this wonderful perch at the Brookings Institution, and it's allowed me to go really deep and study how these new forms of AI are impacting jobs, will impact jobs. I've been able to get out and talk to people. I've been to the Vatican twice. I've convened economists. I've talked with policymakers. And it's been amazing. But my anxiety levels have just keep going up as I watch the meter charts and as I see this is going so much faster than even I thought 3 years ago. And what I observe is angst everywhere. The public is anxious. Politicians are suddenly realizing they need a plan. They don't know what to do. We're drowning in analysis. Everyone's debating. People are just putting out what is happening now, but we're really short on answers. What is the plan? And, when I'm in a think tank capacity, I feel I'm in the conversation, but somewhat on the sidelines. And I feel we've just gotten to a point. I look at my 3 kids and I think, this is too important. I have to give everything I have to trying to not study this, but solve it. So I have to, I can't announce all the details, but I will say that the spirit of what my next chapter is to be dogged and urgent and put everything into figuring out what do we do about this? How do we make sure this transition, especially this next messy middle, we learn from our past mistakes and we actually grip this head on. So, Casey, have me back on the pod in a few months and happy to formally tell you our name and exactly our plan. But you're the first tell. And this is actually the last day of my job and I take the plunge tomorrow. So thanks for being here to celebrate with me.
It is a joy to celebrate with you. Congratulations on the new thing. Cannot wait to learn more about it. I think it is super important. We need lots and lots of smart people trying to help us figure this out. So,
well, and I told
Molly,
you, Casey, before we started that you and Kevin have been the sort of voices in my head. You have so many times called attention over and over to how much this matters to people and yet how we don't have a plan. Where's the plan? What are we going to do? And I heard that every Friday. So, you and Kevin are a big reason of why I'm taking this gutsy move. But I appreciate you putting all this focus on it and really fun to talk to you.
That's very nice of you to say. As a pundit, one of the dream scenarios is that you just sort of every week you just say, when is someone going to do something about this problem? And then somebody actually does. So, and it almost never happens. So
Yes.
It's huge for us. So thank you. It means a lot to us that you're taking a swing. So,
Thanks, Casey.
yeah, Molly, thank you again. And
Thanks,
can't wait to
Casey.
talk to you as you get started with the new thing.
Wonderful. Thanks, Stacey. And congrats on the series. I'm glad you're going in this direction. It's really exciting.
Thank you very much. Platformer is produced by Lindsay Chu and edited by Fitz Harris at Story and Sound. You can watch this whole episode on YouTube at youtube.com/Casey Newton. My email is casey@platformer.news, and we'll see you next week. Take your team from AI novice to AI native with Atlassian Rovo. Go to rovo.com to learn more today.